The moment Prince William saw the letters, the decision was no longer political. It became personal. In a quiet palace room, with the final pages spread before him, he understood what the monarchy had been trying to avoid saying aloud. Harry's return could not happen on his terms. And when William finally refused, the silence that followed felt heavier than any public statement ever could. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not speak at first. He sat at the long table, reading the final letter once, then again, as if the words might soften if he gave them time. They did not. The palace letters were confirmations from royal offices, and in plain terms, they stated that Sussex access meant Harry and Meghan's permission to enter private royal spaces, receive confidential briefings, or use family-controlled residences. That access had been blocked, not delayed, blocked. The prince felt the weight of the sentence before he said it aloud. He knew Harry had expected a route back, some guarded path through which old closeness could be restored without public surrender. But the pages in front of him told a colder story. The Sussexes no longer held privileges they once believed could return with a conversation, a visit, or a softer mood from Charles. The letters turned family hope into official boundary, and William understood why that mattered. Private rooms carried private words. Briefings carried future plans. Residences carried trust. A palace aide entered quietly and placed one more sealed folder beside him. William looked up, and the aide saw his face change before the wax was even broken. Inside was the deeper truth. The restrictions had not been created after Harry's latest request. They had been sitting inside palace machinery for far longer, reviewed, reinforced, and guarded by people who feared what would happen if emotion reopened what caution had closed. Harry, far from that room, believed the door could move. He had imagined resistance, perhaps embarrassment, perhaps one hard conversation with William. He had not imagined finality, and that was the cruelty of the moment. The refusal did not arrive as a brother's temper. It arrived as the crown's answer. William set the page down and made the decision. Harry's proposed return would not be accepted under those terms. The words cost him more than anyone could measure, because refusing Harry meant wounding fragile remains of trust. And as the decision moved from paper into flesh and feeling, the real wound was no longer the blocked access. It was the family forced to choose sides. This was never only about Harry walking back through palace gates. It was about William deciding whether the past could be trusted near the future. Behind every sealed corridor stood a brotherhood that had once survived grief, cameras, and childhood loneliness. But now, one brother carried the crown's burden, while the other carried the pain of exile, and neither could pretend the wound was small. William carried the decision like a stone in his chest. He was not simply a brother refusing another brother. He was the future king, the man expected to protect the line that would one day pass through Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis. Every private room, every briefing note, every residence key carried meaning now, because access was no longer just about family comfort. It touched security. It touched trust. It touched the future shape of the monarchy itself. Harry, on the other side of that decision, was not asking for a simple invitation. He wanted recognition. He wanted proximity. He wanted proof that the life he had left behind had not completely sealed itself against him. The palace gates represented more than stone and iron. They represented dignity, memory, and the painful question of whether a son of the king could still be received as family before being judged as risk. William stood near a palace window, not angry at first, only exhausted. He knew every answer he gave would be twisted into something brutal. If he allowed Harry closer, some would call him reckless. If he refused, others would call him cold. That was the trap of royal duty. It made even grief look like calculation, and it forced private pain into public judgment. Harry received the message through formal channels, and that cold route cut deeper than the refusal itself. A brother's answer had arrived wearing the language of an office. No warm call, no private appeal, no emotional cushion, just the unmistakable signal that he was no longer being handled as family first. The wound became sharper, because the method said what the words did not. The old closeness no longer held authority. The letters made the truth impossible to soften. The Sussex access block reached beyond ceremonial appearances. It touched private rooms, internal briefings, and residence arrangements once believed to be negotiable if Charles showed mercy or William relented. Charles understood the danger. As father, he felt the ache of Harry's humiliation. As king, he knew reopening those doors could ignite a crisis inside the palace and place William's future reign under immediate strain. That was why the refusal became larger than one damaged relationship. It became a test of whether blood could still overrule broken confidence. Yet the true reason this moment became unavoidable was not born in one letter. It began with a single incident everyone inside the palace remembered. To understand why William refused with such finality, the story must return to the private moment that turned hesitation into resolve. Every royal rupture has a moment people later point to and whisper, "That was when everything changed." For William, the trigger was not a headline, not a speech, and not a televised interview. It was a private evening at Windsor, when a confidential family conversation was followed by a breach so precise, so painful, that the palace stopped treating access as a courtesy and began treating it as a risk. William never forgot the feeling that settled over the family after the memorial. The Windsor Library incident, as it became known inside the palace, was a private post-memorial conversation where sensitive family arrangements were discussed behind closed doors, only for details to appear outside palace control soon after. It was not treated as ordinary embarrassment. It was treated as a warning, and for William, the warning cut through every excuse he had been trying to hold on to. Catherine had been beside him that evening, quiet but alert, listening as grief, duty, and future plans were spoken with unusual honesty. Then came the aftermath. William remembered watching her face change when she realized that a private family detail had escaped the room. Catherine did not need to accuse anyone. Her silence said enough. Something sacred had been touched. Something meant to stay within the family had become vulnerable. And from that point, trust was no longer a feeling. It became a decision that had to be guarded. Harry stood at the center of that wound, but not as a simple villain. He was a wounded man, carrying anger, loneliness, and the heavy belief that the palace had failed him first. Yet pain does not erase consequence. His choices convinced others that grief had made him unpredictable near royal confidence, and that unpredictability frightened the people responsible for protecting the crown's private life. The letters later confirmed what many had only suspected. The Windsor Library incident had become the hidden trigger behind the Sussex access restrictions. After that night, the palace began reviewing who could enter private rooms, receive internal schedules, and attend closed family briefings. A closed family briefing meant a private meeting where sensitive plans were shared before the public ever heard them. Once those spaces felt unsafe, every old privilege began to look different. A senior courtier quietly noted that certain doors were no longer opened without written approval, even when the request carried Harry's name. That detail mattered, because it proved the block had not been sudden cruelty. It had grown from a moment the palace could not forget. William understood that history was now standing behind his refusal, cold and immovable. But once Harry challenged the distance placed between him and the family, William had no choice but to confront him directly. What began as a hidden wound in Windsor was about to become a face-to-face reckoning between two brothers who could no longer speak through silence. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with a chair scraping softly against the floor. Harry entering first, William already standing, and the air between them thick with everything neither man had forgiven. There were no cameras, no aides hovering close enough to rescue the conversation, and no public script. Just two brothers, one asking to return, the other refusing to let the crown be exposed again. William let the silence hold for a moment, because he knew the first words would decide everything. Harry had come seeking restored access for future visits, family events, and a clearer route back into royal proximity. To him, the letters were not a wall. They were something to challenge, something to appeal, something that could still bend if Charles softened, or if William remembered what they had once survived together. But the prince no longer saw the matter that way. Harry sat down slowly, still carrying the belief that brotherhood might open a door protocol had closed. A private palace sitting room had turned the institutional dispute into something painfully human. One aide waited outside, far enough to give them privacy, close enough to remind both men that this was no ordinary family argument. William understood why that mattered. If Harry returned without boundaries, the risk would not fall only on him. It would fall on Catherine, the children, the king, and the fragile future of the crown. William placed the letters on the table. He did not push them across like a weapon. He set them down like evidence. The restrictions had not been invented that morning, he said. They had been confirmed, reviewed, and reinforced. Harry's hand tightened on the arm of the chair, and disbelief moved through him, before anger could find words. He had expected resistance. He had not expected William to speak with such cold finality. Then came the sentence that split the room. William told Harry that love and access were no longer the same thing. The words landed with terrible force, because they did not deny feeling. They denied permission. Harry heard the difference immediately. A brother might still care, a future king might still refuse. That was the wound neither man could escape. Harry pushed back, his voice low but sharpened by humiliation. Had Charles approved it? William did not answer at once, and that pause revealed more than any explanation could. The refusal now carried the weight of the future reign. Charles may have felt the pain as a father, but William was already carrying the burden as heir. Harry left without reconciliation, and William remained with the letters still on the table, facing the machinery that had turned family pain into royal policy. And once the door closed behind Harry, the question became even more dangerous. Who truly held the power to decide who belonged inside the monarchy? A royal refusal is never just one man saying no. It is history, protocol, memory, fear, and survival moving through a single voice. William's decision carried emotional force because it rested on something stronger than resentment. Behind him stood letters, access rules, private security judgments, and the unspoken understanding that the next reign could not begin under the shadow of old breaches. William knew the refusal would be judged as personal, but inside the palace, it had become structural. The access framework meant the rules controlling who could enter private apartments, receive internal calendars, attend confidential briefings, use family residences, and appear in certain ceremonial positions. These were not empty privileges. They were the hidden channels through which royal life moved, and once those channels were questioned, every relationship attached to them became dangerous. Charles read the access summary in his study and set it down without speaking. The king understood what the pages meant, and that silence carried more pain than anger ever could. As a father, he wanted to protect Harry from another public humiliation. As monarch, he also knew William could not inherit a palace where emotional pressure overruled security judgment. The father in him grieved. The sovereign in him understood. William's authority came from more than rank. He was the heir, the future guardian of the monarchy's private world, and every decision he made now shaped the atmosphere his own children would one day inherit. Catherine understood that before anyone else said it aloud. She watched him prepare his statement to the family, sensing that the decision had hardened him, not because he wanted power, but because power had forced him to stop hoping trust could repair itself. The letters revealed a deeper chain of approval. Sussex access had not been blocked by a single furious reaction, or one dramatic palace order. It had been reviewed through layered approvals, meaning several offices had examined the same risk and reached the same conclusion. That mattered because no emotional appeal from Harry, no private pressure from Charles, and no sudden family gathering could reverse the decision overnight. A private note inside the folder carried the sharpest warning: restoring access without safeguards would risk reopening the vulnerabilities created after the Windsor Library incident. William read that line with a cold sense of recognition. The past was no longer behind them. It had become evidence. And evidence, unlike regret, could not be softened by memory. Catherine saw the cost in his face. Charles felt it in the silence, after every conversation about Harry. William carried it, because the crown had asked him to be both brother and barrier. and only one role could survive the decision. Yet power on paper does not prevent pain in real life, and the first consequences began almost immediately. The refusal had been made lawful, careful, and firm, but the fallout that followed was raw, human, and impossible to contain. By morning, the palace corridors felt different. Aides lowered their voices. Doors that had once opened with familiar ease now required confirmation. The refusal had not simply blocked Harry's return. It had rearranged the emotional map of the royal family. Every person close to the decision understood that a boundary had been drawn, and boundaries inside families often hurt more than public scandal ever could. William's decision became the new rule before anyone had fully absorbed the pain behind it. Revised visit procedures were placed into motion, meaning any future request linked to the Sussexes would have to pass through formal review before approval. Tighter briefing rules followed, and a briefing meant a private update where royal schedules, family plans, or sensitive decisions were shared before reaching the public. These changes mattered because Harry's return was no longer being treated as a family matter alone. It had become a question of protection, control, and trust. Palace staff understood the message immediately. William's refusal was not a temporary emotional reaction waiting to soften after a few difficult conversations. It was now the operating position. That made the atmosphere heavier, because every aide knew what this meant for future gatherings, private memorials, and family invitations. The old instinct had been to make room for Harry because he was Harry. Now the instruction was colder: no access without review, no exception without authority, no return without safeguards. Harry sat alone after receiving confirmation, reading the message more than once as the reality settled. His return was no longer delayed, it was denied under current terms. That distinction struck him hard. Delay still carries hope. Denial carries judgment. He had expected resistance from William, perhaps even anger. But he had believed Charles might still step in as father before the palace closed the matter completely. Charles tried to join the family call, then withdrew before it could become unbearable. The king could not stand the sound of Harry's disappointment, yet he also could not dismiss William's reasoning. That was the cruelest part. Fatherhood pulled one way, sovereignty pulled the other. And between them stood a future king who had already chosen the crown's safety over family comfort. Then a second letter surfaced within the palace file. It showed that the block did not apply only to official royal appearances. It also touched informal family access, the quiet spaces where old bonds had once survived without announcement. William learned that Harry had expected Charles to intervene, and that expectation deepened the tension between father, heir, and son. The damage spread quietly, but it spread everywhere. Every message now carried weight. Every silence felt deliberate. But amid the damage, one private conversation changes William's understanding of what refusal must mean. The palace had reacted with rules, but the turning point would come in a quieter room, where duty finally met grief without witnesses. The shift did not happen in council. It happened in private, when William and Catherine sat together after the longest day, with no aides, no papers, and no prepared words. He had won the argument, but he did not look victorious. He looked like a brother who had protected the crown and lost another piece of the boy who once walked behind his mother's coffin beside Harry. William carried the silence differently when Catherine was beside him. In public, he could stand firm. In meetings, he could speak with controlled force. But with her, the armor slipped. The refusal had been explained through rules, letters, and security concerns. Yet none of that removed the human cost. He had stopped Harry's return, and even if the decision was necessary, it still felt like closing a door on part of his own life. Catherine understood the difference between cruelty and protection. She did not tell William he was wrong, and she did not ask him to soften what the palace had already confirmed. Instead, she helped him name the truth beneath the pain. A boundary, she reminded him, could hurt without being hateful. Protection could feel harsh without becoming vengeance. That mattered, because William's greatest fear was not public criticism. It was becoming so hardened by duty that he forgot the brother behind the conflict. William finally said what he had avoided saying all day. He did not hate Harry. He feared what would happen if love was used to reopen doors that trust had not repaired. Those words changed the room. They stripped the decision of anger and exposed its real wound. William was not refusing a memory, he was refusing a risk. And yet Harry was still tied to everything he had lost, everything he had survived, and everything he could not simply erase. Catherine reached for his hand, and that simple gesture allowed him to stop performing strength. For a moment, he was not the future king, not the guardian of access, not the man expected to hold the line. He was simply a brother grieving what duty had demanded from him. Catherine saw that grief clearly, and she also saw the danger of letting grief blur the decision. William chose that night that the refusal would remain, but he also decided it would not be framed as punishment. The final family communication would leave room for personal contact, while keeping Sussex access formally blocked. That balance was careful, almost painful in its precision. Harry could still be family. He could not be restored to trust by emotion alone. That choice gave William his private answer, but it did not protect him from what came next. That careful balance would soon face its harshest test when the world learned what had happened. William had found his private answer, but outside the palace walls, the public was about to turn one family decision into a national judgment. When the story broke, it did not feel like another royal dispute. It felt like a door closing in public. The country woke to headlines that reduced years of pain into one brutal image. William inside the palace, Harry outside it. And by midday, the refusal had become more than family drama. It became a national argument about loyalty, forgiveness, and the price of royal survival. William watched the coverage in silence, and the silence said more than anger could have. He had known the decision would be judged, but he had not expected the pain behind it to disappear so quickly beneath public debate. Newspapers turned the refusal into a symbol. Broadcasters framed it as a defining test of the future reign. The palace response stayed controlled and brief, emphasizing access procedures and family privacy, which meant the rules about who could enter private royal spaces and how family matters would be handled without exposing every emotional detail. Harry saw the same headlines from a much colder place. The words did not treat him like a son, a brother, or a man still carrying old grief. They treated him like a problem to be managed. That humiliation cut deep because it stripped the dispute of all tenderness. He had asked for a way back, and the world now saw him as someone standing outside a system that no longer trusted him near its inner life. Then one image captured the day with brutal force. A newspaper front page showed a split image of the brothers under the headline, "The door is closed." It was simple. It was merciless. William on one side, Harry on the other, divided by more than distance. That single page turned private pain into public judgment, and by noon, everyone seemed to have chosen what the image meant. To some, William looked firm, disciplined, and ready to protect the crown. To others, he looked unforgiving. A brother willing to let duty freeze what love should have warmed. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered, and the division became impossible to ignore. Some defended William's firmness, saying the monarchy could not survive if trust meant nothing. Others held signs, calling for reconciliation, insisting that no royal rule should outweigh blood. The palace understood the danger. Public sympathy could shift quickly, and once people began arguing over family wounds, no official statement could fully control the feeling. Charles felt that pressure too. The king knew the nation was not only watching William and Harry, it was watching what kind of monarchy would emerge from their fracture. But beyond the noise, the final meaning of the refusal would not be decided by headlines. It would be decided by what the monarchy chose to become afterward. The world had reacted loudly, but the true verdict belonged to the family, the crown, and the silence that remained after every argument had been spoken. In the end, William's refusal was not a victory over Harry. It was the clearest sign yet that the monarchy had entered a colder, stricter age, where love could no longer overrule trust, and blood could no longer guarantee access. The letters did not merely block a return. They marked the moment the future king chose the crown's survival over the comfort of reopening an old family door. William stood alone after the final communication was sent, and the quiet around him felt heavier than applause ever could. He had not defeated Harry. He had drawn a boundary that would wound them both. The final communication meant the last formal message sent through palace channels to confirm the decision, and its meaning was brutal in its simplicity. Personal affection could remain, but royal access could not return without trust. That mattered because access was never just a private favor. It touched family residences, internal schedules, protected conversations, and the future security of the crown. Harry's pain was real, and William knew it. The Duke had wanted recognition, not another closed gate. He had wanted proof that blood still carried weight inside a family built on duty. But pain could not erase the consequences of broken confidence, and that was the devastating truth at the center of it all. William did not refuse him because he stopped seeing him as family. He refused because family access without trust had become impossible. Charles accepted the outcome with sorrow that no title could hide. The king understood that something had shifted beyond procedure. The crown, meaning the authority and responsibility of the monarchy itself, had moved toward William emotionally before it ever fully moved to him constitutionally. Charles still wore the burden, but the future king had made the defining choice. The father grieved for Harry. The monarch understood why the line had to hold. The letters became more than documents. They became symbols of a monarchy leaving behind inherited assumptions and moving into documented boundaries, where every privilege had to answer to trust. That change did not destroy the institution. It hardened it. It clarified it. It proved that the future would not be guarded by sentiment alone, no matter how painful that truth became for the people born inside it. William's refusal left no easy comfort behind. Harry remained wounded, Charles remained torn, and the future king remained misunderstood by the one person who once knew the boy behind the duty. Yet the verdict was final. There was no door left half open, no promise waiting in the shadows, and no illusion that the old brotherhood could simply resume. William had refused Harry's return, and the monarchy had chosen trust over blood. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.